Hello, dear friends. Welcome to this evening talk brought to you by the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth and Poole Christian Spiritualist Church. I am Fabrício Assunção from the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth. For our presentation tonight, we are honored to have our guest speaker, Marlon Reikdal, who will be talking to us tonight about the therapeutical approach of Joanna De Angelis. We are also pleased to have Luiz Grasso join us. He will be available to act as necessary as a Portuguese and English interpreter. Tonight's event is one of our series of fortnightly talks exploring the psychological series of books by the spirit of Joanna De Angelis, psychographed by the famous Spiritist medium Divaldo Franco. Through Divaldo's mediumship, the spirit of Joanna has written hundreds of books during the last 40 years, including poems and other spiritual works. Our guest speaker, Marlon Reikdal, is a psychologist specialized in analytical psychology. He is currently studying sociology in London. Marlon is a member of the Medical Spiritist Association of Brazil, where he collaborates in the theoretical preparation of study coordinators for the works of Joanna De Angelis. A very warm welcome to you once, Marlon, and to you, Luiz. It's a great pleasure to have you both here with us leading our study tonight. But before the study, let's go to our friend Lawrence Saville at the Poole Christian Spiritualist Church for our opening prayer. Over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you. Try again. Thank you, Fabrício, and good evening, everybody, and welcome. If you'd just like to still your minds just for this short time, link in with that divine thread which runs through all of creation, and send out our thanks, our gratitude. Help us to understand all that we have in our lives. Detract our mind from the wants, but look at our needs. For all our needs are met. We have faith. We have understanding. We have expansion of the consciousness. We have that personal growth available to us. We sit here residing in this physical world for this short time with friends and families and loved ones to help, assist and guide us. And we're all one family, all residing on one sky, and all working our own ways to that path of perfection for which is intended for all things. So as we join together tonight to once more hear new ideas, new philosophies, new ways of thinking, new ways of understanding, we join in gratefulness and humbleness. Amen.
Thank you, Lawrence. Now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Marlon Reikdal and Luiz Grasso for Marlon's talks on the therapeutical approach of Joanna De Angelis. Over to you, Marlon.
Thank you very much, Fabrício. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to say I'm very excited today because this is my first lecture talking in English. I've been studying English for 2 years and I'm not fluent. So this is a very, very special moment for me because when I decided to study English, my plan was to do talks in English, talking about psychology, spiritism, spiritualism. But in my mind, this will happen in 2 years or 3 years more, not for now. And when Fabrício invited me, I said, okay, I will try to do it. So my apologies because I'm sure I make many mistakes. My vocabulary is very poor. And the structure of my sentence are very simple. But the most important, I believe, is I have a strong desire to share with you my knowledge about psychology, my knowledge about spiritism. So I feel comfortable to be here. I believe we are among friends. And for me, this is the best place to learn something. And in the same way, I would like to be comfort to you too, and make me questions if you need. You can interrupt me anytime, and if I can't understand or if I can't express myself, Luiz is here to help me in some words or some questions. And I promise, if no of you understand anything, I stop talking in English, I start talking in Portuguese, and Luiz translated for me, okay? But I hope it doesn't happen. My subject today is the therapeutic approach of Joanna De Angelis. We are not going to talk about specific treatments because all of those treatments are written in her books. I'm going to explain key points to understand her approach. And if you are interested in reading a specific mental disorders, a specific approach, I suggest to you to read the book Existential Conflicts. In this book, she's talking about drugs, violence, stress, anxiety, anger, phobias. In my opinion, is the best on this subject, even though she has several others touching in this subject. Okay, I have some notes here to organize my thoughts and to remember some words in English, because even I'm studying English, I'm not studying psychology in English, so sometimes it's difficult to remember some words, and I will use my notes. I'm sorry. The first point I would like to explain is, when we are talking about the therapeutic approach, we are not talking about a new psychology approach for psychologists like a job. We have psychoanalysis, we have a Jungian approach, we have Gestalt, different psychologists, and this is not another one or a new one. When Joanna De Angelis started writing these books over 20 years ago, she started bringing the psychology to the Spiritism. She explained she was not building a new psychology theory. She was opening our mind to understand the spiritualism, the spirit plus the psychology, because psychology is the theory of the soul. So we had a big problem, because in one hand we have the science, the psychology, and many times they don't talk about spiritualism, about the spirit, about God. In another hand, we have people studying spiritualism or studying God, and they don't talk about psychology. And this is a big gap all we have. And when Joanna De Angelis start to write these books, she's trying to feel, or she's trying to help us to connect these two, we can say these two sciences, because both are very important. All of us need to study psychology. Firstly, to understand ourselves, because we have problems, we have many questions, we have different behaviors, we are trying to improve ourselves. So we need to understand what's happening in our mind, what's happening in this inner world. And in the same way, we need to understand the psychology to understand and to help other people. when we are in a church or in a spirit center, anywhere, people are coming and asking us for help. But if we don't understand psychology, how can we help someone? You can't understand human being. People are suffering, they are in pain, and how they can change their behaviors. How do we bear the sadness, for example, the depression, anxiety? If we don't understand the soul, if you don't understand the mind, how can we help these people? For material problems, I think for material problems, we need to understand the material rules. But suicide, alcoholism, depression, they are not material problems. They are problems of our soul. The soul is harmed, is in pain. How can we help these people? How can we help ourselves if we don't understand the spiritual rules or the rules of our minds? It's impossible. And because of that, many times scientists, philosophers, psychologists are very critical of religions, of spiritualists, because we are trying to do something, but we don't have a background. Sometimes we can't really help people. We are trying to do something, but it's not sometimes a strong conception about what we are doing. So in this case, I would like to share with you an example. Maybe with this example, you can understand a little better. Yesterday, Luiz and me, we were talking about psychology and how important the psychology, exchanging some ideas, and said, oh, maybe this example can be nice. So I will share my screen with you and I come back later. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So we have, in the bottom, we have our troubles, our challenges, our problems. All of us have problems and challenges in our lives. And when we are trying to manage this, we are trying to cope with this, we have some reactions. The psychologist reaction, the psychological reaction for these problems, we call emotions. So anger or sadness or fear or happiness, they are the reactions, the emotional reactions, trying to cope with the world, trying to manage the situations and how I feel, what I have to do, or what I can do in that moment. All of us have these emotions. They are very important in our life. But if you don't understand the psychological approach, you think anger, for example, is something bad, and you have to forget your anger. You have to breathe and let it go. But it's not true. this is a very simple conception about emotions. The same sadness, when we see some people, oh, he's sad, okay, but we don't know what we have to do with someone when that people is sad and say, oh my God, put a smile in your face, the life is so wonderful. But you are not helping that people. When we are living these emotions, we have a psychological structure between the world, the inner world, and the outer, how can I say, inner and outer world, probably. Between us and the world, the challenge, the problems. And the point is, the relationship with this world, these problems, and our emotions is through the ego. So depends how the ego understand himself, depend the ideas I have about myself. I will have a reaction A or B. I feel anger or I feel fear, or I will do this or I'll do that. So the point is, everyone can have the same problem, but we can have different reactions or different intensities, because depends the ego, who I am, what I think about myself, how I understand myself, or how I understand the world, or the people, or the relationships, depend my view, my point of view, to feel anger, sadness, fear, or happiness. So this is an important point, because we stop trying to change the world. The problem is not my son. The problem is not the drugs. The problem is not my wife. The problem is not my computer. The problem is me. And the idea is the way, is my reaction, is how I feel, is not outside of me. It's about me. When I'm angry, this is talking about me. When I'm sad, this is talking about me. And the psychology try to help people to stop talking about the world, to think about themselves. If you don't understand this, you can help people to pay attention or to look out themselves, and you do the opposite way and you are not helping. But the second point is, if you learn how to manage your anger, you can have different ways. A good way and a bad way, we can say, simple. A good way is when you learn to use your anger and you have, we call, lucid action. You can do something, and sometimes we only do something when we are angry. Sometimes we are not able to do something when we don't feel this anger. But if you don't know how to cope with this anger, you can have the violence. This is two opposite sides and the same point in your life. If you know and if you understand about anger, you can have a lucid action, or you can be a violent person. It's interesting because the big personalities in the world, like Martin Luther King Jr., or like Mahatma Gandhi or Jesus Christ, all of them felt anger, but they could use this anger to have lucid actions. So this is very important because anger is an energy to improving you, to helping you to do something. The anger say what you have to do if you understand yourself. The sadness is the same. When you know about sadness, you can have a good reaction we call introspection. But if you don't know and if you don't understand, you have a depression. This is the different, the opposite sides, the same emotion. Because when my mom died, if my mom died, I feel very sad. And this, how I understand the life, how I understand myself, how I understand the world. This can be depression. And I stop thinking about my life. I don't feel happy anymore, nevermore. Or this experience call me to my inner world for introspection. Oh my God, I lost my mom. I never realized I could lose someone. But with introspection, I learned something because I lost my mom now. And I have a father, I have my sons, I have my wife, I have my husband, my parents. So now, if I learn from the introspection, I change my behavior. The sadness helps people to change their behaviors. The anger helps people to have lucid actions. But if you don't know, you are violent, you feel depression, fear is the same. I hope you are enjoying these ideas. I can't see you, but I hope you're enjoying. If you don't know how to manage your fears, if you know, you can be you can feel prudence, prudence behavior. You think better before doing something. This is the fear in our life. But in the other side, the anxiety is start with the fear. So anxiety is probably the biggest problem in our world, and talking about mental disorders. So if we don't know how to cope with our fears, we develop the anxiety. And happiness is the same, because sometimes you can feel enthusiasm, but sometimes you can feel euphoria. Is different. Euphoria, and sometimes it's okay. But this euphoria we are talking about is when you are trying to feel something, but you didn't do something to feel good. So we are drinking alcohol, we are using drugs, we are buying clothes, we are doing many different things to feel this false happiness. Euphoria is a false happiness. It's not true because you didn't build something to feel this happiness. So when you don't understand yourself, you go to this side, the problems, euphoria, anxiety, depression, violence, and I could explain many other problems and mental disorders from our emotions. So I brought this. Let me hide this. Where are you? I think it's here. Stop screen. Yes. So I brought this scheme to show you how important is. I can see my 1 second. I can see the clock. Okay. Yes. So I brought this to show you how important it is for us, religions or spiritualist person, understand the psychology. Because if you don't understand, you are not helping people. But in the other side, when Joanna De Angelis was bringing the psychology to the religion, Spiritism, she was saying you have to study the psychology to behave better, to understand yourself. So this is the biggest point, because we are not psychologists. We are not expert in this subject. So what we have to do, for me, when I'm trying to read her books, I understand, oops, I need to understand psychology. If I want to talk about human being, if I want to help people, I need to study psychology. It's not as a job to study psychology. It's not in the university, but it's to understand who we are, who the others are, and to understand how we change the behavior, how you manage our feelings, how you change our mind. And when she's saying you need to study psychology, I would like to offer some ideas about what we can study, what is the main points to understand the psychology. And after, if we have time, I would like to bring everything together, the spirit concept with the psychology approach, okay? So don't we have questions? Do you think it's okay until now?
No questions coming up, sir. In fact, the opposite. People are complimenting you on your delivery of English.
Oh, thank you. Because if there's no question, probably no one understands anything. Or okay.
I think quite the opposite, Marlon. I think everybody is thoroughly enjoying it.
Oh my God! Thank you very much. So I would like to introduce you. If you are not psychologist, I would like to introduce you three big ideas, or we call in psychology three big forces. The first one was the psychoanalysis. The most important man was, I'm sorry, we have a question.
So the question is, Marlon, if self-knowledge is the key to mental and spiritual health, how do we promote this?
Oh my God. Could we have 3 or 4 hours more? This is impossible to answer. I'm sorry, Jamie. But Jamie, the name is Jamie?
Jamie, yeah.
Jamie, I'm sorry, Jamie. But this is a so important question. I agree with you. But this is another subject. Because for me, this is the main point in the religion. The Catholic Church, or most of the Christianity or Christian approach, or Christianity understand Jesus Christ in a different way that psychology understands Jesus Christ. And when we are trying to study psychology, we can come back to the Gospels, for example, and we can see all the time Jesus talking about self-knowledge. But if we don't understand, we don't understand Jesus Christ, and you do his speech, like rules you have to do, you don't have to do, is poor. Is not about that. It's completely psychological, his approach. So, but to talk about self-knowledge, we need to use more concepts from the psychology, like ego, shadow, personas, or self. It's impossible to explain now. Okay, but I'm saying, I'm sorry. Your question is very important, but I don't have time, and it's impossible to answer you now. Okay, but this is very, very, very important. So I was talking about the three biggest forces in psychology. The first one is a Freudian theory, psychoanalysis. Freud started his lectures, or his job is studying hysterical women. Hysterical women was people, especially women with disease. For example, they couldn't talk more, or they couldn't walk. In one specific moment, they stopped walking, they stopped talking. But if you was trying to understand what was happening in the body, nothing was happening in the body. And they start to understand the point is not the body, the point is the mind. And he start to talk about the inconscient. The inconscience. Luiz is correct, inconscience.
Unconscious.
Unconscious, I'm sorry. I hope you understand. Unconscious is something that I'm not aware. I don't know about myself. This is a biggest point, because I think I know everything about myself. I think I understand completely who I am. But Freud, more than 100 years ago, said, "Oh, stop. You think, but you don't know. You don't know who you are." And we can understand this with our reactions. Sometimes we have reactions, or we have symptoms, and you say, "What, I'm doing this? I wouldn't like to be this person. I wouldn't like to behave this way, but I do. I can't change." Or sometimes I change this behavior and appear another behavior. But no one is what we would like to be. This is the unconscious. There is something bigger than us. There is something bigger than the ego, bigger than my mind. And he started these studies, and he opened another big door, sexuality. This is another big problem for us, because when I'm eating, when I'm buying clothes, when I'm delivering lectures, he said, your sexuality is there. Everything in Freudian approach is sexuality. And this is very difficult to talk today. Could you understand what is to talk about sexuality 100 years ago? This is a very interesting point, hard to understand, some conceptions to accept, but the psychoanalysis is a very important theory nowadays, very important to understand many behaviors. But this is one psychology. Can you understand me? This is one psychology. After Freud, for example, we had Jung. Jung, he knew Freud, but he said, "Oh, I don't agree completely with your theory, because the sexuality is one point, But we have other points. For example, he was talking about the collective unconscious, and he said, I don't know if God exists or not. I know every human being has a psychological representation of God. So Freud was a pessimist. He had a different background. Jung was a religion person, and he studied about religion. For example, he said there is a upper instance that controls and administrates the human being. He was talking about the true self. There is something special or divine that manage our behavior. Is completely different from Freud. And this is the first force, the psychoanalysis with Jung, Freud, Melanie Klein, and different authors, but all of this group are psychoanalysis. Do we have a question?
Yes. A question that has come from Sue. She says, what advice would you offer to anyone facing difficulties in today's world where their sense of normal life has gone and cannot be returned to, and so they are facing great uncertainty?
Luiz, could you help me?
Yeah, okay, I'll translate this. Então, qual é o conselho que você poderia dar para uma pessoa que está enfrentando dificuldades no mundo de hoje, em que elas perderam o senso de vida normal, né? E não conseguem voltar para esse sentido de vida normal, né? E, portanto, eles estão, então, enfrentando, assim, uma grande incerteza.
I'm sorry, Sue. I don't understand what is their sense of normal life has gone.
Yeah.
What do you mean? We are talking about a specific problem.
Sentido de vida normal
Yes.
desapareceu.
I will ask you, Sue, if you don't mind, to explain better your question, and I come back trying to answer, okay? Because I don't understand what do you mean. The second important force in psychology is the behaviorism. The behaviorism was happening in the same time than Freud in other space. John Watson was the first man to study the behavior, and it's completely different approach because Freud was trying to understand the human being using the unconscious. And Watson, or after Pavlov or Skinner, was trying to understand the human being through the behavior. It's completely different. It's completely different approach because I wrote a point here to show you. Psychoanalysis was focused on understanding the unconscious motivations that drives behavior. Behaviorism studied the conditioning process that produce behavior. So it's something that I learn. You do this all the time with me, and I learn to do this. And if you hurt me all the time, I stop doing this. It's the conditioning process. Obviously, I'm sorry, is much complicated than that, but I'm trying to explain the idea. They are not talking about mind. They are not talking about unconscious. They are not talking about sexuality. They are saying, what I do with you, constantly you learn or you avoid. And Skinner had a very impacting sentence. He said, give me 10 children, and I do one engineer, one doctor, one psychologist. I do everything I want. It's strange, but his idea is I do because I can manage their behaviors and I can do everything I want. So this is completely different, and this is the second approach. And in opposition, can I say opposition? Being in opposition, we had the third force in the end of the 20th century, with Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. They call the humanist psychology. So if you're trying to understand the human being, you need to learn a little about psychoanalysis. You need to learn a little about behaviorism, and you need to learn a little about humanist approach, because Carl Rogers said everyone in the beginning is good. And the problems, the social problems, and the other difficult, the disease or illness or everything we have is the consequence to go away or to go from away. I can't explain. Se distanciar.
Yeah, to go from.
To go from.
To go away from.
To go away from our nature, because in essential, the human being are good. So three different approaches, completely different, in opposition sometimes, and I could talk about 10 different approaches. My question is, who is the right? The sexuality, the behavior, or the idea about person, who you are a good person? Who is the right? Because Freud can explain you behave this way because of your unconscious, because of your sexuality, everything. Skinner can say you behave this way because of the conditioning behavior, da 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 da. And Carl Rogers will explain completely different. Who is the right? And the point is, every theory in psychology works. Everyone has patients. They are helping people. Who is the right? And this is the best point for us. When Joanna De Angelis was talking about psychology in the spiritualism, in the spiritism, she offers the concept of spirit to psychology. So in the same way, she was bringing to she was bringing something for us, spiritualist people, but in the same way, she was offering something for psychologists, because she was saying, if you don't understand the concept of a spirit, you can't understand a human being. You be fighting, because sometimes you believe in CBT, sometimes you believe in psychoanalysis, sometimes you believe in different approaches. And if you don't study, if you don't understand the soul, the spirit, you can have a dialogue between psychologists. You can't put everything together to understand a human being. This is a little complex to explain. I try, and if it doesn't make sense, you tell me. But Freud tried to explain or try to understand the human being when the person was born. Skinner tried to understand the human being when the person was born, and the same for Maslow. But when we understand the concept of spirit, when we understand reincarnation, for example, we understand this person doesn't start when he was born. He started before, another time. With this concept, you can bring everything together. You can understand because the spirit is the structure, is the main point, is the spine, and the spirit has behaviors, has conditioning behaviors, conditioned behaviors, has an unconscious, has feelings, has sexuality, has everything. But if you don't have this spine, if you don't have one big idea, you can't put everything together. And I believe because of that, in psychology, we are fighting. Sometimes we are fighting with psychiatric. Sometimes we are fighting between psychologists. Sometimes we are fighting with religions because we don't have a common idea. The common idea among all psychologists is the spirit. So when Joanna De Angelis was talking about that concept and bringing to us the spirit, the soul, and explain in psychological terms, psychological approach, she is in the same time teaching us religious people to understand the human being, but she is teaching the psychologists, neurologists, psychiatrics to understand the soul. We need this connection to understand the human being. And to maybe to my conclusions, I was thinking today about this point when we bring the spirit to understand the human being, we open many doors, many rooms. All of these are the lecture or the book to think about, because we can talk about reincarnation. With reincarnation, we can understand better memories, we can understand better behaviors, we can understand better disease. Everything change for a doctor, for example, or a psychologist when we understand the concept of reincarnation, when we understand the concept of spirit, or when we understand the concept of spiritual influence. This is amazing because when we study spiritual influence, we can understand the mental disorders in different way. It's not because everything is spiritual influence, but you understand some patients, they don't have good results taking medicines because sometimes we are talking about spiritual influence. And some people are in the church thinking about spiritual influence, but they need to take medicines. So there's a relationship between both, and we need to study everything together. So I'm thinking how important is for us to study psychology, and how important is for psychologists, for doctors, therapists to study the spirit, to bring everything together. But I will try to explain how I think this can happen. Did we have a question, Laurie?
Yeah, that's a question that comes from Jamie. He says, if I understand you correctly, you are talking about the fourth spiritual dimension of health, without which we are not a whole person.
Yes, Jamie, this is the fourth dimension of health. But the point is, many times, this fourth force today is separate. How can I say divorced? Separate
Separate, tá certo, separate.
of the science, and I can't understand what happened in England because I'm new here. I can understand what happened in Brazil with this spiritual dimension, because when in Brazil we start to talk about this fourth dimension of health, this fourth force in psychology, we start talking about spirituality without psychological concepts. We start talking about spirituality without understand the medicine, without understand psychiatric, without understand important points for better comprehension of human being. So for many doctors or scientists or universities today, this spiritual dimension today, how can I say, Luiz, caiu em, eu queria dizer assim, desacreditado, está desacreditado.
Yeah, the people doesn't believe it anymore. So
People doesn't believe anymore.
It's discredit.
Discredit, exactly. It's discredit. It's discredit not because it's not true, but because many people are talking about this spiritual dimension without talking about this psychiatric dimension or psychological dimension or medical dimension. The human being is everything together. So I'm trying to convince you that to have space in the university, to have space in academy, to have space everywhere, we need to put everything together to show for these people that these concepts are very important to understand human being. I have an analogy. Do you understand analogy?
Yeah.
I have an analogy with the spiritual dimension, and I would like to share with you. Let me see if I wrote in some place. Yes, here. I was thinking maybe we today is the age of the spirit. But to understand the age of the spirit, I would like to compare the spiritual reality with the neurological reality. Do you understand what I mean? The neurological reality happened in our world many years ago. We couldn't believe the brain was so important to drive our life. In one moment, we believed the heart was the biggest, the most important part in our body. We couldn't believe how complex or how important the brain was. This we're talking about 50 years ago. And when they start to talk about the brain, many people didn't believe. It was ridiculous, the idea that everything we do happen in our brain. It's ridiculous, this idea. And they had many theories trying to explain how important the brain is for us. Today, a teacher, a doctor, a psychology, a good teacher, a good doctor, a good psychology, everyone use this neurological reality, this knowledge to improve their abilities, to improve their jobs. if you have a teacher and he understand about how the brain works, they can offer better classes. They can do something different. A doctor or a psychologist, when we study about the brain, we change our perception about human being. We change our approach. This I call the neurological reality. No one more say, no, I don't believe in the brain. This neurological approach is ridiculous. If you say this, you is the problem. You are the problem. No? In my mind, we have to work to create the spiritual reality in the same path, in the same way the neurological reality. The geneticists, the trainers, a father, a mother, they will behave different when they understand the age of the spirit. Because when I have two sons, I say, but I do exactly the same, and how they behave completely different. You can't understand this if you don't understand the spirit. Or can you understand why a child with 3 years old has a cancer? It's so hard to understand, trying to understand the biological system. You can't understand if you don't understand, if you don't study the spiritual reality. And I believe if we do our homework, if we study everything together, the spiritual approach can be more credibility. How can I say? Credibilidade.
Yes, credibility. Yes, give you more
Credibility. The
belief.
doctor will believe this because he has many patients from that church, and they become better. They change their lives. And I said, I don't know what they do in that church, but I had many patients with the same problem than you, and they are better now. Maybe you could see. This is when can change, when can show what we can do, but we can't change a society with religion, without science, without psychology, without medicine, without psychiatric, everything together. So my idea is the age of the spirit become with, or start with, people doing a good job, showing how the spiritual approach or the spiritual knowledge is not simple, is not, how can I say, is primitive, or
Primitive, yes.
primitive. Because sometimes our speech is primitive. We're talking about mental disorders, but we don't know what we are talking about. Depression, no, you have to think in God, you have to pray, you have, oh my God, you don't understand about psychology, you don't understand about mental disorders. Please stop. Because when one doctor listens to you talking this way, we are showing the bad approach in spirituality. So I believe the age of the spirit is start with universities, obviously, but start with church, with spirit centers, with everyone in religions or in spiritualism. Study psychology, psychiatric, self-knowledge, this approach to do something, to do a good job, to show to the world the spirit is not something simple, is not something superficial, is is like the brain, very complex. We need to study more and we can change our society, but we need to start or to improve this process. This is my idea, or this is what I believe, and I'm happy to share this with you. Is a short time we have, so I can say I'm sorry again, because sometimes we could explain better something, but I think I can explain some ideas. I hope you understand what I mean.
Thank you, Marlon. I have to say, you have done a great job speaking in English, a lot better than I could have done, and I have been here a lot longer than you. So well done for facing the challenge. We have got loads of comments and questions coming up on Facebook. So going back to Sue's question, she explained and clarified a little bit more what she meant. So just reading out to you, I meant where their life has changed so much from what they knew as the everyday routine, which is what we call their normal life. Example, if they no longer travel easily, there has been great social and economical impact on their lives, for instance. This means that we cannot return to the old way of their lives. What advice could we offer?
Okay, Sue. This is a good question, and all of us are living this challenge. The world is changing, and in Jungian theory, I'm a Jungian psychologist. In Jungian theory, when you can't change something, the question is what I have to learn from this. Because if you can't change and you are there, is because you can change your life from there. So, for example, now the world is ill. The world is ill. We are living a pandemic. So some people are trying to do the same and they are becoming tired. It's impossible. But some people could stop their lives and ask what I have to learn from this. And they start changing their lives. So the main point is sometimes we are fighting with challenge, problems, something changing our life. And the the clever person is stop fighting and put face to face with their problems, they challenge, they troubles, and ask, what do you want to teach me? What I need to learn from you? But I believe, Sue, this is a difficult point, because if I don't understand myself, if I don't have this a minimum self-knowledge, I can't understand what the world, the problems, the troubles are trying to teach me. If I think I'm amazing, if I think the problem is the world, the problem is other person, I am perfect, I am marvelous, I don't understand what the life is trying to teach me, because I'm marvelous, I'm wonderful. So when we start that process, the self-knowledge, we can understand our troubles, we can understand our disabilities. And when we understand our disabilities, we understand the world is coming perfectly in our points, trying to teach us in our points. So this is fantastic, because you understand everything happening in the world or around us is not happening. How can I say acaso? Não é acaso.
By chance. Chance.
Is not chance.
It's not chance. Not by
It's
chance.
not chance. It's
Not by
because
chance.
I need to live that experience. So this is fantastic. because I need to live that experience. So I open my mind. I open my mind and ask what the world, what the life, what these problems can teach me. And with this, we change our lives, we improve ourselves. Okay.
Thank you, Marlon. There is a comment from Alice. She say, this proves spirituality is not religion, it's science.
Yes, Alice, I agree with you. Obviously, I agree. But I'm saying many times we talk about spirituality without science. We talk about the spirituality like simple things in the world. And I know I could notice in England with some friends, English friends, and we're talking about spirituality, and they said, "Oh, no, this is ridiculous. This is not serious."
Yes,
Serious.
serious.
Serious. I said, why you were saying this? No, trying to explain some ideas. And when I start to explain some ideas, some universities, some studies, they said, oh my God, this is very interesting. I have never heard about that. I said, tell me which spirituality you heard about that. And they said, no. And they have many examples, we could say bad spirituality or bad approach or simple approach. So they told me about many mediums, about many religions, many churches. Um, you can't believe that. In the same program, we are watching a program talking about spirituality, reincarnation, and life after death. And in the same program, they had a very good approach in science with universities and some ridiculous examples about spirituality. So I was talking to my boyfriend. I said, "Oh, please pay attention to this and don't pay attention to this because I don't believe this too. I think this is ridiculous and this is very nice." I said, "Yeah, oh, at least you understand this is ridiculous and this is nice." So I agree. This proves spirituality is not religion, it's science. But many times we can do this properly.
Thank you, Marlon. Jamie just comment here, say, thank you, Marl. I have really enjoyed the way you have combined the spiritual and psychological approach. It really resonates with me.
Oh, good. Thank you, Jamie.
And Jacqueline mentioned interesting discussion. And another question that has come from Sue, she says, how does the collective human consciousness expand its awareness?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I love to say this. It's easier. I think it's easier, but I'm sorry. I can't explain. In English, I could think, and the best way now is say, I don't know.
Okay. Last question for tonight is come from Susan Brown. Absolutely enthralling talk, giving a whole new way of thinking. Thank you, Marlon.
Thank you, Susan.
Cool. So, what I'd like to do now, we will close the questions there. I'd like to announce our next talk. So, our next speaker is Charles Kempt, and he will be here with us. He'll be talking with us from France. And our next event is going to be on the 8th of October with Charles Kempt from France. Is there any closing remarks that Marlon, Luiz, or Laurie would like to make tonight before we go to Lawrence for the closing prayer?
I've loved it, Marlon. Absolutely loved it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, and yes, I believe I love that allegory about the mind 50 years ago wasn't understood. So yeah, fingers crossed. In 50 years from now, spirituality will be hopefully much more understood. Wonderful. Thank you.
Marlon made my job very easy, so I didn't have to step in. No, I speak no English, so.
Thank you, Luiz, to be here.
Thank you, guys. So Gabriel, just reading the last comment, he said, "What a blessing life. It's always good watching you guys together talking about spiritism. Thanks a million for your time." On that note, with all good comments, I will hand it over to Lawrence for the closing prayer.
Thank you. So once more, dear friends, draw into that silence within, that temple and shrine to those higher energies. And we give thanks for this evening. We give thanks for this information shared. But most of all, we give thanks for the ability to join together this way, to enrich our hearts, our minds, our souls, and to walk hand in hand along the path of progress. And as this night draws to a close, we send out our love, our healing, our thoughts to wherever there is a need within this whole wide world. Amen.
Amen. So thank you once again, Marlon, for being here with us tonight. It's been a pleasure. And I hope you come along again the next in future. And I would like to say a good evening to everyone who has been watching us. And I look forward to see you on the 8th of October. Goodbye and have a good night.